Very well. Good morning and welcome to the CRE Roundtable. This morning's topic is what office tenants need to know for 2021 and beyond. I'm your moderator, Scott Warner, and we've assembled a bit of a local blue ribbon panel to discuss the topic this morning. So let me introduce the panelists and then we'll get started. First of all, we have Jared Kadri, who's the Senior Market Analyst for the CoStar Group. CoStar is a market leader in analytic and marketing tools for the commercial real estate industry, and he'll be providing data and analysis for us as it applies to the office market. Maverick Olivares with the Broderick Group, he'll be representing the landlord and owner side of things, and he currently represents over 1 million square feet of Class A office space. We have Owen Rice and Brian Kelly, who will be speaking for the tenants as tenants rep. Owen has completed 800 or so commercial real estate transactions in his career, including 61 in 2020, and exclusively representing tenants. Brian has a 25-year history of advocating for tenants, and in the last 3 years alone has brokered more than 4 million square feet of commercial real estate transactions. We have Cody Morrison, who is the portfolio director for the Pacific Northwest for WeWork, and he's a 15-year veteran himself, exclusively working in the tenant representation industry before 2 years ago shifting over to the supply side and flex office with WeWork in the region. Meghna and Banu are the co-founders of Extra Slice in Bellevue, and they operate a flex office facility there, catering to tech companies like Accenture, Slalom, HCL, UST Global, to name a few. And later this year, they're also launching an application to help tenants self-direct the leasing process. Last but not least is Michael Christ, the founder CEO of SECO Development. Michael is a visionary developer with over 30 years of successful projects here in the greater Seattle area, ranging anywhere from 140,000 square feet to more than 2.4 million square feet. And most recently has a 730 square foot Class A lakeside office campus, brand new, in the Southport district. So let's jump right in. Jared, you're up first. Take us through the numbers.
All right. Thank you, Scott, and everyone at Extra Slice. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if it does not work, or a thumbs up if it does. Perfect. Awesome. So as Scott mentioned, I am a senior market analyst at CoStar. We are the #1 provider of commercial real estate data and analytics. So my main focus today is to talk about the data and what we saw in the market in a cataclysmic year, 2020, and what to look forward to, kind of what to expect. But before we get started, just to give you an outline, the data here will represent the whole metro. So it's not just the city of Seattle. It's going to be King, Snohomish, and Pierce counties combined. That is the MSA, and that's what we focus on. For those of you that want to take notes, please feel free. If not, we will be sending out the slides. So the first thing we want to do here is take a look at what happened in 2020. I outlined the second through the fourth quarters for a reason which may seem obvious to many folks. That's when the pandemic was in full effect. You see a major decrease in leasing volume from the first quarter and then for the previous 3 years, right? We finished the year at 30% lower in leasing volume. In other words, total square footage leased, signed leases for new leases in the market. Now you look at the large leases, right? We did this into different slices, no pun intended, that we have much of it being Amazon space, right? The third quarter, about 2 million square feet leased by Amazon in Bellevue in under construction towers. But aside from that, you really didn't have that many large leases. A lot of big companies remained on the sidelines and they're kind of, waiting it out to see what they wanted to do during these uncertain times. The other thing too is leases 20,000 square feet or less. That makes up the vast majority of the total lease count. Numbers were down. They weren't quite down as much as the large leases, but just to give you an idea of that leasing activity over time. Amazon has been very active on the east side, especially in 2020, and I think you'll continue to see that maintaining its tight market in Bellevue and beyond. We look at the lease count, right? New leases signed back to 2017. As I mentioned, the vast majority of leases are for smaller space. In this case, 20,000 square feet or less. Even in that slice, a huge chunk of it is attributed to 5,000 square feet or less. That's been a trend going back for several years. It's also a national trend. But in 2020, the gap tightened, right? We had, I should say, kind of spread out because you didn't have as much large leases. And you can see that in the data here. But just to give you some perspective on the total number of leases signed in each year going back to 2017 or so. Down quite a bit, and especially for the larger segment of the market. Who's leasing big space, in this case, 20,000 square feet above that, other than Amazon? 1201 building in the SODO district of Seattle was one of the largest direct leases that was over 20,000 square feet in 2020. 43,000 square feet by the Seattle Mariners, right across from their home field, very convenient. Just to give you some kind of perspective on the size, it's much smaller in the non-Amazon space than in 2019 and before. On the east side at Eastgate Office Park in Bellevue, Wizards of the Coast is headquartered in Renton, which Michael will, I'm sure, talk about Renton quite a bit, but they have expanded a little bit into the east side, 32,000 square feet in November. And lastly, sublease alert, right? We're going to talk in the next couple of slides about sublet availability. That has been a major trend in this market. It has been mostly focused downtown, but it's all across the metro. And I think it's important to talk about that. And a lot of it still remains available. This is one exception where it has been sublet by a mid-sized tenant. P2S Inc. is a sustainable engineering firm. They signed on for 22,000 square feet at Textio's former space. This is a great example of companies that can move up in class due to the flood of sublet availability space that's both on a short and long-term basis. And we'll get into more detail on that in a couple more slides. Talked about the sublease availability, a very important thing to cover. We've reached record levels for the amount of sublease space on the market in Seattle, especially growing in the third and fourth quarters of 2020. Kind of when the pandemic was in full force, companies had a little more clarity on what was going to happen in the short term, and they were putting on their space on the market for sublease. It's not only startups, mid-sized firms, many large firms with headquarters and regional offices in Seattle putting up their space for sublease. As of February 11th, when I pulled the data, it hasn't changed all that much. 6.7 million square feet of sublet availability space in the office market in the Seattle metro. As I mentioned, a lot of it is in downtown, and these are some great examples of companies that are putting up their space for sublease at a time when they're not utilizing their office to the full extent. These are very large companies. Historically, we've seen smaller companies putting space up for sublease, but some good examples. Dropbox at 2AU, which is AKA Qualtrics Tower. It's almost Qualtrics' second headquarters here in Seattle, but the Dropbox space was put up. They never actually physically moved into that space. So it's almost like having a full term. And for a tenant that's willing to move back to downtown, they might get a very good discount and a long-term lease. F5 Tower is their newer headquarters. F5 Networks, 515,000 square foot space. 115,000 square feet of that was put up for sublease earlier this month. That's almost a full term too, because they moved in 2019. And lastly, we've all heard about this one, Rainier Square. It is the second tallest building in Seattle, and it remains the largest sublet space on the market. Almost 600,000 square feet. That's been available well before the pandemic, when Amazon shifted its focus towards the east side, almost, in a lot of ways, but a lot of it was a retaliation to, regulations by the city of Seattle. The space largely remains available for lease, with two tenants in the financial services industry, Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, taking the balance last year. Short-term leases. So there are also opportunities, I think, in 2021 and beyond, that because these spaces remain available for people to get a short-term lease of headquarters, oftentimes in Bellevue. These two examples of SAP Concur and Symetra Financial put up a good chunk of their headquarters just kind of to get that space, because they realized they weren't going to use it all. They might as well get some kind of rent in place. Highly coveted. So if you're looking for higher end Class A space in downtown Bellevue, these are good examples. As you can see from the picture, they're right next to each other. So kind of the area that will become Amazonville in a few years. Lastly, downtown, it's not only long-term leases, even though those are the hardest hitting, in my opinion. This is a shorter term one, GE Healthcare at the Tower at 4th and Madison, 137,000 square feet with about 3 years remaining. So what does this all mean for rents? One of the main metrics we look at CoStar is rent growth, okay? And with availabilities up, leasing volume down, that spells lower rent growth. And that is exactly what happened in 2020. We had minus 3% year-over-year rent growth. And you saw the rents go down to lower than $40 per square foot on average. That is a gross basis, by the way. So that's going to be a big change. That is the first time this has happened since the Great Recession. The Great Recession, the trough was much lower. We had, double-digit negative rent growth. We'll see if that happens in this market. It doesn't. Hopefully, it doesn't. I think we're on a good track now, even though it's going to be a while till we fully recover. But just to give you some perspective on the rental market, looking at areas specifically, this is every submarket in the metropolitan area. I'm looking at the bottom right of this chart because these are the areas that performed the worst in 2020. No surprise, they're all downtown core submarkets. Downtown Seattle, aka Seattle CBD in the middle there, minus 5.6% rent growth. That's after a year where you had about 5% rent growth in 2019. So that is a major shift, right? You go to other areas in the suburbs, places like downtown Bellevue, we had minus 1% rent growth after doing nearly 12% year-over-year rent growth in 2019. So yes, downtown has bore the brunt of the weak market, but it's the east side and other suburbs are not excluded from this. Good news is places like downtown Bellevue and east side submarkets, as well as to the left of this chart, Renton, Tukwila, Michael will talk more about that. These are places that are poised for strong growth because companies are relocating outside the urban core. It's closer to where people live, and it becomes more convenient, especially with light rail expansion in the works. So I think those areas will fare better, at least in the next year or two. Downtown core still has a long way to go. Many of you may have read the article in the Biz Journal today. They're saying at least 2 years for a full recovery from downtown. Downtown Seattle Association had come up with that number. Now, to finish the presentation off, we'll talk about development. I think that's one of the main things we did not talk about yet, and I think it gives some insight in what to expect over the next couple of quarters. So I do green and red, kind of red light, green light, good, bad, for a reason. The red, bad, because it's highly speculative construction. This is space that has not been spoken for the most part. It's in an area that is going to take a lot longer to recover because downtown has felt like a ghost town. So I feel like those areas will take a little bit longer, whereas the green, the east side, especially downtown Bellevue, much of the space has been pre-leased by Amazon and other large tenants. So Facebook and Amazon and others will likely follow. Paints for a very tight market in downtown Bellevue and beyond, places like the Spring District. The good news is there are flexible office options, right? Companies like Extra Slice, WeWork, Spaces, you name it. Those are kind of catering to people that want to be in a tight, desired market like the east side, and they provide flexible options for people. So just to wrap things up real quick, leasing was down in 2020, but an onslaught of available space will give some tenants more leverage in 2021. You saw the rent growth go down significantly in the metro, 3% as a whole, nearly 6% in downtown Seattle. Downtown has the most space available for sublease, and also direct space in under construction. And that could serve as an opportunity for some tenants, maybe on the higher end of that threshold of 20,000, to move up in class. And then lastly, east side suburban areas remain relatively tight, but a good amount of flex office space could give tenants more choices over the next year or so. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Jared. Panelists, does anyone have an important question maybe they'd like to ask at this time? Otherwise, we can move on, just unmute and ask away. Well, I have one. I don't know how important it is, but I was looking at the rental rate chart, and we certainly saw a pretty significant and sustained dip in asking rental rate, and presumably contract, of course, would follow. And I'm just wondering, Jared, you had mentioned, I think you had said, hopefully we're not going to see a repeat performance. And I'm wondering if there's any dynamics or any data that might give some hope that that won't be the case, or is it kind of paralleling? And so we might need to buckle up and look at that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, as things stand, all else being equal, Our baseline scenario is calling for a recovery in, about mid 2022 for the market as a whole. And I think, it's a much different animal than the Great Recession. Great Recession was a financial crisis. As of now, it hasn't been the case. Fingers crossed, hopefully it doesn't become one. But it seems like we're on a good path to recovery now, especially in the second half of the year. A lot of tech companies, I think they set a precedent for when we go back to the office. And that'll make a big impact. So companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, et cetera, if they stick to their plans to come back in the summer of 2021, I think we're on a good road. And hopefully we won't see that rent growth like we did in the Great Recession. All else being equal, I don't think that's going to happen.
Got it. Well, thank you. Well, let's move on then to Maverick. Good morning, Maverick. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Excellent. Real good. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
Before we get into current state and the future, I wanted to talk about tenants in the marketplace. Almost all of them today have have leases in place, and some are expiring soon. Some have already expired. Others have significant time left on their contracts. As a landlord rep, I'm wondering what kinds of conversations that you've been having over the last months with tenants as it applies to the pandemic. And fortunately, we know that most companies haven't suffered financially, but there are many that have. And I was wondering maybe if you could share, because again, we're presenting to tenants in the marketplace, what advice or counsel or other advice would you give to current tenants as it applies to leases that they're in currently that they'd like some relief or like to come out of?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say in the early stages of this pandemic, mostly everyone was trying to understand and get their arms wrapped around, one, what's happening in the world, and two, real estate was a secondary point of discussion for most groups, right? I think including all of us. So fast forward to now, most tenants have really understood what's at their disposal from a concession standpoint, which, CARE Act, PPP loans, which everyone's very familiar with that now. And so fast forward to where we are today, hopefully everyone's business is doing well. And if they're not, then, certainly what we've tried to figure out is if you do have a lease that is coming up, how can we find mutually beneficial ground for figuring out where your lease is at today, how potentially an owner can help you restructure that. But I think the fine line comes down to how much term you have left. And if you're actually in serious negotiations of at some point entertaining the market, which generally speaking, if you have over a year left of term, it's going to be pretty difficult to have a frank conversation with an owner on how you can restructure a lease. Now, not to say that that's the majority, but certainly there's one-off scenarios just depending on what owner and operator you currently lease from. So what I would tell a tenant is if you're going to deliver a message and really try to figure out how to restructure a lease, really understand who your owner is, who the landlord is, what their function is, and really be able to paint a picture to where it's mutually beneficial for both parties.
Great. Well,
yeah.
Thank you. Clearly, as we were watching the data, we can see that the supply is increasing, both from subleases and also direct inventory. And conversely, the demand seems to be extremely light. Well, it is extremely light and may stay that way as it hopefully slowly builds. And that, of course, given to COVID restrictions still in place and also the adoption and success of working from home. Should landlords in general be concerned, and why or why not?
It's a great question. And it's one that I think we're all trying to figure out here. That's not only on this panel, but within our industry, right? And so what I would say is everyone is now starting to, from tenants to landlords, are starting now to have these discussions of what does the future work look like, work model. I think we've proven and we figured out that there's some efficiencies and there's certainly some benefits from remote working. But with that, I certainly think comes some inefficiencies, especially if you have a 2-year-old at home or you have kids that are in the background. So it doesn't really lend to being nearly as productive. That said, I think a lot of companies are figuring out what type of hybrid model that they can incorporate into their day-to-day. And I would say hand in hand, owners are trying to figure out how can we create an environment where tenants are comfortable coming to and from the office. So whether that's wave sensors coming in and out of the building, elevator dispatch that could just be tapped by your key card and it gets you directly to your floor, reintegrating their HVAC systems to, eliminate any potential making sure that you have clean air that's circulating through the building on a regular basis. Just the overall experience, I think, is becoming that much more pertinent to tenants, and landlords are conscious of it. And those are discussions that are happening right now. So frankly, what I think is we're seeing a lot of space on the sublease market, right? Varying levels, whether it's on the east side or in Seattle. And I think the common theme that I'm seeing is with a lot of uncertainty comes indecision, right? And so a lot of these companies are putting their space on the sublease market because they're currently not using it. That's not to say that they're not going to use it in the future. And I don't really think anyone truly understands what their ratio on a per employee basis is going to be when it comes to square footage. And tenants are trying to figure that out now. And so I'm a firm believer in most of these tenants, which the bigger tenants are really drafting the market as it relates to big tech putting their space on the sublease market. I'm a big believer in the fact that I do think most of those tenants are going to reoccupy their space, because the reality is to your point, Scott, there's not a tremendous amount of tenant demand, generally speaking, when you look really as Puget Sound as a whole, which I can get into further detail about that on the east side, which is completely different. But I guess my point is I think we're going to see a lot of this sublease space not get leased by an incoming subtenant. And at some point, once everyone does get the vaccine and there's a lot more certainty around where we stand and how we're going to operate in the future, you're going to see a lot of these companies, in my opinion, reoccupy their space. Now, the million-dollar question is, what does that look like? Which is everyone's best guess, right? And I think everyone is figuring that out as we speak. So,
as you talk about reoccupation, does that mean that these tenants who are now subletting, particularly maybe even the large chunks of space that we saw in Jared's slides, would they then be more inclined to do 2-3 year deals with options thereafter, with an eye on moving back into their own space?
Yeah, I mean, Brian,
monetizing it in the near term.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I know Brian and Owen can speak more in detail to that based on the conversations they have had with their clients, but certainly based on the subleases, the significant subleases we're tracking, most of those tenants that are putting their space on the sublease market are taking into consideration of what the long-term ramifications are of subleasing their space throughout their entire term. So to answer your question, Scott, I do think that they're lending themselves some flexibility to be able to take that space back. Now, it's a case-by-case basis based on the tenant, but I certainly think that that's something that they're thinking about behind the scenes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as a broker on the supply side and looking at the glass half full, what excites you most about 2021 and the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think what excites me the most is, certainly there's always innovation that comes from this, and there's going to be a lot of learning lessons that I think we all have experienced, whether it's a tenant or on the landlord side. And so the interesting thing that I think I'm most excited about is that I'm optimistic about a landlord representative is the fact that, one of the challenging things that I think we have come to realize is it's really hard to instill as a company your culture. It's hard to really find any type of mentorship virtually. And I think there's a lot of components that with I'm going to call it the physical touch, plays a huge factor into our day-to-day, whether you're tech or your professional services, right? And so the ability that I think I'm looking forward to is the fact that when people do get back to the office, which is going to happen, everyone's going to realize, I think, how much that they have really missed out on the fact that you haven't been able to network, you haven't been able to see your colleagues, you haven't really been able to get hands-on training or mentorship or management from your peers, which I think is going to be extremely invaluable. So when that comes and when that happens, first things first is certainly get the vaccine and be able to have a little more certainty in our day to day. But I would just say getting back to the office and seeing our urban markets thrive, and even just suburban areas thrive too, is something that I'm excited to see. So.
And I know you're not a tenant rep, you do represent landlords, but of course you don't do any transactions unless it's a win-win for the tenants, right? So what advice, maybe 1 or 2 points, would you give tenants who are in the marketplace right now? Are there kind of a top 2 inside, not tips, not tricks, but advice that you would give?
Yeah, I would say definitely look, I mean, when it comes to value right now, there's no question you're going to get it on the within the sublease market. I think there's certainly some value there for across the board, whether you're I'm going to call it a 10,000 square foot user or a 2,000 square foot user, being able to capture, lucrative deal terms at a short-term lease, which I think is beneficial for most of the parties trying to figure out what they want to do. And I would say outside of that, in terms of if you're looking to execute a lease on a direct basis, is to just really understand, who the landlord is. Are they institutional? Are they a family office? What their long-term proposition is. And then, when you're really trying to make a case for deal terms, just really making sure you understand what levers you're pulling and how that could be in some capacity mutually beneficial versus, just really looking at it from as a one-way road. I think goes a very long way, because as I think the market perceives from the outside looking in to be the sky is falling. I think there are a lot of strong data points to suggest, based on the submarket and the class type of product, that owners are still generally well positioned in the Class A plus market on long-term leases, to Jared's point, with really strong credit tenants. And so, depending on the size, if you're a 3,000 foot tenant or a 10,000 foot tenant, the reality is the percentage of the building that you make up is probably not a large number. So therefore, if you can really come with a better understanding of what your position is and being more thoughtful with your approach, I think it's certainly going to go a longer way.
Maverick, thank you so much. Well, that brings us to tenant representation, and we have Owen Rice with Hughes Marino and Brian Kelly with Savills. And between you both, you've got 30, 40 years minimally of tenant rep experience. And so first for Owen, I'm going to have 1 or 2 individual questions for you, and then I'm going to be addressing you as a collective. But Owen, 2020, obviously extremely challenging year, certainly for office tenant rep brokers. Yet last year you did 61 transactions. What kept you busy?
A lot of short-term requirements. We early in March, we called our clients, prospects, and let them know what was ahead of us. Because at the time, a lot of people felt like they weren't really sure what the future looked like. But looking back at the evidence that we had at the time and the thousands of conversations we had with our clients, we knew what has since transpired was indeed going to happen, and warn people against doing anything long term. Not to mention the fact we have a lot of clients that were struggling. Right, they were not immune to the headwinds that we were faced with the pandemic. There were certainly some companies who thrived, and they continue to thrive today. But there's others that not so much. And so in those cases, we were busy frantically doing what we could to help them offset their runway and their cost. And some of those were lease restructures, like Maverick talked about. Others were short-term renewals. But nevertheless, in any instance, to varying degrees, there was something to be done. Something to help our client, and so that was we were very busy doing such throughout the year.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So I would imagine that a lot of what you were doing was helping tenants negotiate with their existing landlords for this interim period, and then also certainly planning for the future, which I'll get to in a couple questions here down the line. Brian, there's little debate that today's market is a tenant's market, and that is a sharp contrast to where the market was pre-pandemic, which was just a year ago. What has changed the most And what's important when you're negotiating a lease in today's environment?
I think what's changed the most is concessions available to the occupier space, to the tenants looking at the space. Whereas in 2019, tenant improvements were light and free rent was scarce. And today, I think Maverick and a lot of the different people representing the landlord community are probably more apt to provide more concessions. So maybe more free rent and a higher tenant improvement allowance in order to make it easier for the tenant to make that commitment to a lease term. So I think that's probably the most notable.
Okay. For both of you, the majority of tenants who would normally be leasing offices for the last year have been on pause and remain on pause as they're waiting to get some visibility to be able to determine what their next moves are as far as office space. What are the advantages and disadvantages for tenants to continue to wait and see instead of commencing and conclude as far as office searches go? Brian, you first.
So I've been telling all our clients to do the wait and see. And the reason why is I think Owen articulated it, and Maverick and some others, and that is that we had very clear telltale signs that the market was getting softer, meaning it was getting more tenant friendly. And, if you don't have to negotiate in 2020 and you could wait till 2021 or even 2022, it seemed like that would be the right thing to do because you would be able to achieve more tenant favorable terms than you would otherwise. And so I feel like we're kind of in that sweet spot right now. The vaccine's rolling out, but not everybody has it. The landlord community is starting to really come to terms with the fact that it's a different landscape today than it was in 2019 and in early 2020. And it's probably a good, productive time to work to try to reach mutually beneficial terms, albeit probably better terms for the tenant than for the landlord.
Okay. Owen, advantages, disadvantages for tenants continuing to wait and see or commencing and concluding at this time?
I'm in a similar camp as Brian. I mean, we are advising our clients, if you don't have to do something or there's no reason to do something, why not wait? And the reason is pretty simple. All the information that Jared presented to us was fantastic, right? And that's statistical information based off of the information we know today. What we don't know and what has yet to be presented to the market is the additional amount of subleases that are going to be coming on the market, some of which have been promoted to our clients. In Seattle specifically, I can speak to hundreds of thousands of square feet. I know that sounds crazy, but there are literally hundreds of thousands of square feet of supply that will be on the market in the next 90 days by way of other additional subleases. Not to mention the fact there are leases rolling in 21 and 22. When I say rolling, I mean expiring, that are get to expire. As those tenants renew, I would suggest to everyone that the majority of those tenants won't need the amount of space they're in today. They've come up with a new normal, and therefore they may indeed, hopefully it's for all of our sakes, think they need office space. But even if their headcount doesn't grow, I think they'll be able to do more with less space. At least as the discussion that we're here having with our clients is that they believe, at least today, that as we look forward, they will continue to need office space. I don't have many clients that have said we're just going to go 100% virtual, but they are being more thoughtful with how much space they lease. And so with those two factors that have yet to be accepted and kind of memorialized in Jared's data, I would suggest that if you don't need to do something now, odds are either the market will be as it is today or even better from a tenant's perspective. But that being said, there are companies that are thriving and have already made up their mind that we need office space. And if that's the case, great, we can go execute on your behalf. In fact, there are transactions, albeit not tremendous, but there are transactions happening today at terms that are indicative of the terms we saw back in the 2008 financial crisis. And as Brian mentioned, I mean, the concessions are growing by the day. When I say concessions, I'm referring to tenant improvements, free rent, et cetera. And so knowing your submarket and where you're looking for opportunity and value might guide you to certain areas of the Puget Sound versus others. But if you had asked for a general thesis on this, I would agree that waiting is probably prudent at this point.
Okay. Just a brief follow-up question for you, Owen. You've been quoted as saying there's a big difference between asking rates and terms and contract terms and rates. Could you just take 30 seconds and elaborate?
Sure, an asking rate is very simple. It's what the landlord is asking the market to pay to lease his or her building. And taking rate is the rate that's actually negotiated. And so rarely, albeit maybe it happens time to time, rarely does a tenant sign a lease at the published rate on an office lease. So that's our job as tenant rep brokers to negotiate those terms in addition to everything else that goes along with the lease transaction. So that's the major difference. And the other thing that's worth noting, just for what it's worth, is when you get a lease comp, a lease comparable, and it gets out to the market, keep in mind that transaction was probably negotiated 3 to 6 months ago. And so what we're just now starting to see are terms that are indicative of the fourth quarter and first quarter of this year. And those aren't going to start to trickle into our hands, so to speak, for the next 30 to 90 days. But there's a big difference between taking rent and asking rent as defined.
Got it. Okay. All right. 3 words: work from home. For the better part of a year, all office workers were working from home, rendering virtually all office space useless. Currently, that's eased up a bit, but more office workers remain working from home. Brian and Owen, I'll start with Brian. What are clients telling you about the near and long-term impact of WFH on their office requirements? And do office tenants expect working from home to decrease or increase over the next few years?
Yeah, so very interesting question. It's on everybody's mind multiple times a day. And so what's been interesting is that productivity has been higher than expected for people working from home. They don't have to get in their car and drive in and fight traffic. They can literally start working when they roll out of bed. They don't even have to put on their pants. They just can start working. And
got many in trouble, hasn't it?
Yeah. So it's from that standpoint, productivity is up. But what I'm hearing across the board, and will be good news for everybody in the space business, is that they're not able to advance their business at home, meaning they're not able to collaborate. They're not able to put together the creativity and the ingenuity that they need in order to get their business that either it's either a service or a product that they're selling to go to the next stage. And therein lies why you need office space. And it's now not just a destination. Everybody's looking at office space as a tool. And it's in the tech stack as a critical component to a business. And so what I'm hearing across the board is that people definitely want to come back to the office when it's safe to do so. And they may not need as much space as that they had before, but it's going to be well thought out space that they do retain. And so we're trying to get our arms wrapped around really what the footprint's going to be. I'll give you an example. We have a group that historically has allocated 150 square feet per person, full-time employee. And we're out now looking at 250 square feet per person is what they want to do going forward, even after the vaccine. They just want to have 250 square feet per person. Yet they are going to take some of the people out of the Seattle area and go put them in a submarket that is less expensive. And so on balance, I think the requirement will probably be 10% smaller than where it was, but the allocation per head obviously is going to be higher. Therefore, they're going to need to grab more space for the headcount that they're going to keep in the Seattle Bellevue area. And that's what we're hearing across the board, is that they're going to allocate more square feet per person. The space is probably going to have more soft seating, more huddle rooms, more conference rooms for teams of 2 to 4 people to come together, because really that's what the space is all about. The space is about getting people together so that they can, do those things that human beings need to do in order to advance their respective cause. And so I think that's what we're going to see from a tenant improvement standpoint too. There's going to be modifications to the space to make it more compliant with this pandemic world we're living in.
Yeah. So in the sum up, as far as the increase or decrease over coming years, reading between the lines, was I seeing that the work from home will be decreasing as working at the office, either full or part-time, increases?
Yeah, I think this hybrid model is going to stay. I think it's permanent. It's just, but I think there's going to be less people working from home, to answer your question, than there has been during 2020.
Owen, what do you think? Work from home, what's the impact now and what's its long-term impact?
Short-term impact is going to continue through, the majority of this year. I hope that we're all back, in person and working together by October or so is my guess. But we'll see. Long-term, I think it's a component, like Brian said, for here to stay. As to how much, it varies by company. I have clients that have said, we're going to have, a limited amount of office space because we're going to work from home 4 days a week and we're going to come in on Friday. I have other clients who said, hey, it's going to be a floating day. Like, for example, you can have 1 day a week where you work from home, but the balance of the time we want you here in the office. I have some clients who've said, we're going to be here 5 days a week. So there's really no one size fits all solution, but the fact of the matter is the majority of the people out there are telling us that they're going to ask their teams to, come into the office to some extent, to be determined, and allow them to work from home other days. As to how much remains to be seen. So it's definitely going to be changing the workforce. And I would agree that, how is that office right-sized? Maybe 10, as much as 20%. But even think about that, if it's 10% of our market, and we give back 5 million square feet of real estate to downtown on top of what already exists, that's a big shift. And that's why I think it's going to take years to recover fully from where we were 12 months ago.
Thank you. Finally, subleasing and sublets. They're flooding the market, and many experts believe that trend will continue through at least 2023. As tenant reps, you're also the listing broker for client subleasing, as well as the procuring broker for clients looking for sublets. As such, I think you uniquely have visibility on both sides of the sublet transaction. And so the two questions I have for you both are, what should sublessors be prepared for when subleasing? And then on the other side, what should tenants be looking for when subleasing? Brian, you first.
I think the really nice Class A sublease offerings are going to eventually go first, right? They have the most amenities. They're going to probably, I think Maverick said it, you're going to be looking for things like dispatch elevators. You're going to be looking for HVAC systems that have lots of outside air coming in on a regular basis. And so those type of newer spaces, we'll call it, will probably go first. The other thing that really helps when you're subleasing space to differentiate yourself from the pack is to be able to provide some kind of allowance, be it $5, $7, $10 a square foot, just something so that the sublessee can take that and modify the space a bit so that it works for their business going forward. And that really makes it easier for a tenant to take a look at direct space and sublease on an equal playing field, and then enjoy the economic benefit of subleasing space, but have enough money there to modify the space a bit so that they feel good about tailoring that space to their specific business. So I think on a sublessor standpoint, that's what you want to do to differentiate. And it's a happy day for a tenant wanting to come into the marketplace because, like Owen said, there's plenty to choose from with over 5 million square feet of sublease space hitting the market. And there's going to be some really nice options, whereas in 2019 and early 2020, it was very tight.
Yeah. Owen, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Subleasing and sublessors? Yeah,
the Class A space is going to go first. 42% of our available supply in Bellevue is subleases right now, and 37% of the supply in Seattle is subleases. Some of them nicely appointed, fully furnished. Some where they haven't even built the space out. One of the subleases that Jared presented in his slides is a sublease that the tenant built out 2 floors and left the other 2 floors vacant, and just intends on passing on the allowance they achieved when they initially leased the space onto the new subtenant. So the choices are abound. There's no shortage of options. And I think if you're the tenant, the procuring side, consider those spaces that are fully furnished. We have subleases on the market right now that literally you could walk into tomorrow with everything less your computers and your phones. On the sublessor's perspective, how do you stand out from the pack, right? With so much supply and more coming, what differentiates you? Because the challenge that to some extent that the tenant rep brokers have is whittling down the list of options for those that are most likely to be seen or most your client will like most, because no client wants to be sent 50 different options. They're looking for leadership. And which ones would you tell me that we suggest we tour? And so keep in mind, like, what is unique about your space that's going to allow you to attract the tenant as quickly as possible? Because after all, it's a wasting asset, and you're just trying to get somebody in there as soon as possible. So having it furnished, providing an allowance of some kind to help personalize the space, so someone's not having to inherit your brand colors, and other things such as minor concessions and maybe even possibly some free rent would go a long way.
Terrific. Terrific. Thanks for that. Thank you, guys. On to Cody Morrison, who actually spent 15 years in the marketplace as a tenant rep, and the last 2 years now with WeWork, who's a leading supplier of flexible offices in the region. Just a simple question up front here. How would you describe flexible office, or what is flexible office, and how does that differ from traditional office space? Simply put.
Sure. Well, I think flexible offices changed quite a bit during the pandemic, and it's really accelerated what flexible space has evolved to. Flexible space, I think, has traditionally been classified as very short-term, site-specific locations that allowed tenants to come in and rent on a month-to-month basis, rent on an annual basis, everything from a desk in a sea of desks to a private office to a full floor. What we're seeing now is hyper flexibility, where it's hourly, where portfolios are digitized, where you can book via an app, where you can book via a web service that allows you to get really specific and very, very local, even to where you've digitized parking availability. So we're seeing the flexible space model continue to evolve because of the pandemic and our market conditions, not just here in the US, but globally.
Yeah. Again, since you have such a deep experience in the tenant rep area, what surprised you most, or what discovery maybe did you make now that you're 2 years with WeWork that maybe you didn't know as a tenant rep about flex office and it's, well, I'm just going to leave it open. I'm not even going to lead.
It's a really complicated model. Not going to lie, it's a really complicated model. It's not easy to be good at this. It's not easy to be great at this. But it's a really fun and dynamic industry. Just the amount of transactions, the amount of volume that you have at scale like this is substantial. And to operationalize this while still delivering a great member experience is incredibly challenging. And it truly takes a village. It really takes a team of talented and dedicated professionals who can lean in. This has obviously not been an easy time for any of us, but we've all had to really lean in and have challenging conversations and deliver great member experiences, in the light of a pandemic and all the other setbacks that we've experienced over the last year.
Right. Hub and spoke has quickly become a popular phrase for many enterprise companies when it comes to post-pandemic office strategy. What is hub and spoke, and what role does flex office play in that?
Well, hub and spoke refers to the model where a company will have its hub, its main core HQ in one location, and then distribute its spoke, if you will, to neighborhoods or different geographies. I think what it means for each company is a bit specific to that company. If you take a look at a hyper-growth company that they might want to have its hub and spoke in a flexible space operator, because this headcount needs are really undetermined. A company that's much more mature, that's got a really big lease or own portfolio, it might make sense for them to employ the flexible space model as the spoke, because they've got a significant footprint, already as a hub. And we're also seeing some growing companies that are using us for just the hub. And it really depends on what's happening with their individual business, with that business unit, in market. But it also depends on can they find inspired real estate and inspiration in the space, in their office space? To Brian and Owen and Maverick's points earlier, people are going to come back to innovate. They're going to come back because they want to collaborate more. They're going to come back because they want to get back to that, being charged up by those meetings, to having that real innovation that can only happen in person. One thing that we've found is that at the start of the pandemic, to Brian's point early in his time, productivity was really high. And I think that we've seen that kind of consistently dip over the time as the pandemic has evolved. And now not only has innovation taken a hit, now we're not quite as productive as we were at the start of the pandemic, just because it's hard. It's hard for us that manage family life, or maybe your partner or spouse works from home as well, and that's challenging because you're fighting for the office or bandwidth or whatever. They're really challenging conditions that we've had to address as the pandemic has continued to drag on.
Got it. And, last question for you. So how has business been for you so far this year? Have you been surprised? And what does 2021 and beyond look like for WeWork, in your opinion?
Well, we've been surprised by the amount of pipeline that we've added so far. To Jared's point and everybody else who's spoken so far, we're keenly aware of all the sublease inventory, of all the other market conditions, political conditions that have made it challenging to transact in Seattle. But when we take a look at what's happened, in markets like EMEA and markets like Asia, who are a little bit ahead of us in getting back to the office, and where vaccines were more widely distributed, or people were like truly locked down, we've definitely seen a big uptick in that activity. And we've also seen here locally, like I said, significantly more pipeline in 21 than we anticipated.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that bodes well. I'm in your same industry, so I'm happy to hear it. Speaking of which, next up we have Meghna and Banu. And my question for you both, if you could, looks like you might need to unmute your microphones. As operators of flexible office here in Bellevue over the last 4 years, you guys have really journeyed through the best and the worst of times as it applies to the office industry. So what have you learned as we're talking today that has changed the way that you do your business today?
I'll take that, Scott. Hi, everybody. The change with COVID, I mean, it's basically for many industries, including mainly to the commercial office spaces. It was a punch on the face, and the things changed over in a very short period of time, or a small week. Things changed over. So the key thing there is, like, we had our best year in 2019, and all of a sudden things changed over. And like we have seen, is that our main focus is the as we see, is that the shared workplaces, or any of those things that we have seen it until 2019, which slightly go under demand during the pandemic process. But our main product is for companies who want a flexibility in a faster way and wide variety of choices. So when we look into it, what we see is that most of these tenants, that's we call the customers, and they're going to drive the market, and their fundamental needs are the same. The location, the flexibility in the terms, and the option of different configurations, so they can have the best configuration for their employees and their productivity. And there is nothing, the price and the other factors like shareability and all those things did not matter very much.
I see. Okay.
And that's where we are moving our focus, and that's where our capabilities are.
Did you want to add on top of
Yeah,
that?
yes, I want to. So today I was just doing a Google trend search, and also today morning, so you all can take a look into it. So if you look at a search trend, Google trend, what the industry is looking for, people are searching for. So if you look office space leasing versus co-working, so what interesting fact I noticed is like the past 5 years, if you search office lease, it's pretty stable. You know, you don't see an exponential hike or drop or dip even now. So that means people are still doing that search word, office lease. But if you look at co-working, 2018, 2019, you will see an exponential hype in that word search, which is not right now. You will see a dip in it. So Extra Slice as a company in the workspace, we started in a co-working segment. And later we understood that people are not there to co-work. They are looking for flexible office space. So period. You know, so we shifted our focus clearly from co-working to how we can better serve our client in a flexible manner. So majority, I would say 95% of our clients if you look in 2020 or 2019, used our facility not to co-work together. It's to find a flexible choice for their office space. So what we learned in this time is that COVID clearly punctuated that. And as a team, we'll be investing more in how we can provide more choices in a fast and flexible manner for our customer. So shared office space is a solution which provides fast and flexible options for the tenants in a smaller manner, but bigger corporations are also looking for the same choices, how they can be faster, flexible, and how can they choose from multiple options. So that's where we think is the future going to be.
All right. Well, while you're still on the screen here, as you're planning for a post-COVID world, what new challenges and or opportunities do you see for Extra Slice or the Flex Office business and or the tenants that we ultimately serve?
So I would say the challenge is like anyone in this screen right now and listening is like we don't have a magic wand to predict what's going to be. You know, and I'm a strong believer, being in a tech, coming from a tech industry, work from home or remote or like, you know, the power of technology is going to be more powerful. You can see how the team evolved, how the Zoom evolved, you know, so it's going to be the companies in that segment is going to innovate to make the work from home or collaborative innovation to happen. So the part of like just like Brian mentioned before that where the office space come into the tools for a technological innovation, it's still going to be there, but in a different form. You know, so it's we are actively listening to the customer and seeing like what is that. I hear the term all the time these days, hybrid. You know, most of the companies are saying they're going to come as a hybrid model where their employees have the flexibility, but they want the collaboration to happen inside the office. So it will be an interesting thing too. So the challenge is sensing the market and building the innovation based on what the market demands for.
Thank you. Thank you. And Michael, thanks for your patience. Michael Christ is founder, CEO of SECO Development. And Michael, by the very nature of real estate development, it is a forward-thinking undertaking, as projects take years to plan and to develop, requiring hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. You, over the last 30 years, have developed over 75 acres worth of urban core mixed-use projects all around the greater Seattle area. And I wanted to ask you about your current project, which is Southport on Washington Lake, and being very presumptuous that since it just delivered within the last year, that there's a lot of forward thinking that's already baked into that project. And some of it might even complement some of the COVID type concerns and COVID driven requirements that tenants in the marketplace are now considering. So Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the project and also some of the unique aspects of it that would be of appeal to tenants who are in the marketplace this year.
Thank you for the opportunity to describe it. So Southport sits on about 25 acres on Lake Washington, and it used to be a power plant. And we've built thus far about 2.4 million square feet. It's mixed use. So I've Hyatt Regency, Lake Washington. There's about 380 apartments and 740,000 feet of Class A office space that's now newly completed. And it, I feel very gratified given the changes. And I think part of what I was asked to describe was post-COVID, what's going on now, where are things going? And I wanted to keep it kind of simple because I know limited time is available, but post-COVID location, the product and characteristics were kind of the buckets of information I'd like to share. And location, I would like to also place this in a context and things that I pay a lot of attention to. So a recent statistic, I just heard 58% of all East Side jobs are in tech. So that for me is very, very meaningful because I've built my whole career off of building for tech. That was, you know, I was watching what Microsoft was doing and I paid attention always to it. Then you also have the tech companies have grown in value by 60% just in the time of the pandemic. So we've seen an unparalleled redistribution of wealth again that is going to be incredibly meaningful to the tech companies that have been fueling our economy. And I enjoyed seeing CoStar's graphs. You could see the placement and the power of those companies. Most of them haven't even touched that wallet yet. We also have the government that just pumped $3 trillion into the economy. So for me, I have a very different perspective, I guess, from a lot of the discussion, which I think is very poignant for today. But I'm also looking at a change that's underneath my feet that is ongoing. So back into location, the reasons why people leave their job is really important to watch. The reason why people leave their tech jobs, housing availability, and their commute. Well, why am I in Southport? That's where the housing is. That's why I'm building over there. I don't think, and I think this lesson that we've all learned out of the pandemic is we don't want to sit in our cars for 2 hours a day. We don't want to queue up in garages where policemen are flagging you in and out of the garage every day. I don't want to sit in queues in elevators. This whole comfort that we get out of our home, I think, is going to flavor our choices, both for the choices, because now it's a great job. We said it was a tenants market. I would say it's a tech workers market. They are going to be so sought after with the size of the wallet that is out there right now. So then looking at what is the product of the future? Well, first off, it needs to have parking. So the old paradigm in the legacy offices, these silos, when you have a parking ratio of 0.9 or something, well, that's not going to work. It won't work today because obviously public transit doesn't work today. But I also don't think that there's a pendulum that swings all the way back. I think there's an elasticity that never returns to its original shape here. So we're going to be seeing parking ratios in the next paradigm that are going to increase. Instead of this 0.9 ratio, we're going to see these 2s and 3s again, starting to return to the market where people have their access, they can get in and out of work. If I have a choice to work 3 days a week, what is that experience and what's that infrastructure? Because it's all about hiring that person again. Now I'm that company with the hardest paradigm I have. How do I hire and attract someone? So there's parking, but a very, very important aspect of it that Maverick had described as did Owen and Brian earlier. There's also the assembly space. So how do you meet? How do you collaborate? How do you work in those spaces? And what's interesting is I do not personally believe that the old legacy office is conducive to that environment. I can't have people riding elevators separated by silos or having to come out of a building, cross the street to go to a meeting. For me, the inefficiency of that creates a new paradigm, which I've witnessed in China, in Shenzhen, in Shanghai, in Chengdu. All these cities have already been where we are. And they focus because it was all about the efficiency of the workforce and how people work together. And they've created these low-rise environments that are just outside of the downtown core, but it is a very, very different characteristic of those spaces. You have the last characteristic that I think is really important to ponder is health. It's unique because in my company, we went down to Southport and I've not lost an employee in 15 years. Well, that's not what's happening in tech because you're on a park, you're on the lake. It's really cool down there, but it's also, there's a health quality. And again, mimicking what Maverick had brought up earlier, you have operable windows. As Amazon started putting in their buildings, but it's different when you're in an urban core and the quality of air, et cetera. So you have operable windows, DOAS systems, which is dedicated outside air. So you're not reheating and cooling air that's circulated in a building, which I don't think works in the future. And unfortunately is a characteristic of a lot of legacy buildings. You also have in legacy buildings where you have lobbies of 5,000 or 10,000 square feet. Well, that's not going to work anymore. And they were tied to load factors of 15%. That's an old vestige. We're not lawyers anymore. We're not in our little silos. As a tech worker, I need to work together. I need to travel together. I need to be able to meet and greet. And those load factors have to change. We're going to see a growth in just outside of the city. You got to stay near housing. You need to stay near transportation, but the load factors grow. You're going to have decks, porches, changes in characteristics to these buildings to be able to draw people. So we're doubling down, and I don't disagree because it was very thoughtful when Brian and Owen were describing this moment in the marketplace. But I'd like to add a counterpoint beyond just the economic transition with the enormous wealth that is now in those companies that are pretty much chiseling our future. Things that work against the lowering costs. So cost of construction now is a minimum of 20% greater. So that's new construction from what one did in the last round of the buildings you're witnessing. And that won't go back. that can't go back. And in fact, land prices are actually on a rise again. So with cost increases, you're seeing the new product that is in downtown Bellevue, that's going to cost in the 900s a foot. So that we have to factor into our short and long-term planning. And as we're looking out for the safety of our customers, watching where these companies are going to go, you also have a density factor that is never going to go back to, I was a great fan and paid a lot of attention to what WeWork had done, and also studied, you know, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and saw the template where it went down to about 125 square foot per worker. And it's not going to happen, not this round. The flexibility that you're describing is everything. But if you adopt the platform where these companies are going to grow at the rate that I'm describing because of their newfound wealth, I mean, 60% in 1 year. These companies have been around for 20 and 30 years. They're going to be on a hiring rip. They're not going to be able to have as many people in the same office. I'm going to go as fast as I can to do another 1 million square feet next door on the lake. They're going to need that space. They're going to need the spaces that are available right now, much of which is not appropriate. If you have a small floor plate, if you have people waiting, sometimes maybe 2 hours between a commute, waiting to get in and out of elevators and everything else. If you factor that in, and it's all about the worker right now for me, it means there's going to be enormous need, and you want to be within I-90, I-405, I-5 in that triangle. You know, there's my soapbox. Why Southport? You know, that's why we're investing down there, but I'm going to keep pushing the quality, and I'm going to keep my price point low, you know, so that it's attractive to people, because I have to compete with enormous amounts of, you know, legacy Class A, smaller floor plates with all those characteristics, but I have to make it really special. So I'll fit it, I'll build it, I use the top architects, I use the right materials, but I have to also not build to the density. Otherwise I lose that health quality. So that's what we're doing down there, but we're going to grow another 1 million square feet of office, where we bought the land, and then we acquired another parcel that we can do another 500,000 square feet, so that people can be predictable in their growth. They can plan for it, but there's also everything from the power grid, which is super important because mobility ties to the electrification of the grid. Renton has the most powerful power grid from Vancouver to Mexico, because you've got the Bonneville line comes right into Talbot Hill. Well, that's something I used to do in an earlier life. I did a lot of civil. That's a critical aspect of this, because other places cannot supply the grid for the electrification of vehicles and fleets and everything. And you also have a city where you have big enough parcels that one can actually master plan, somewhat like what Microsoft is doing in Redmond, which is fantastic. I mean, it's worth the tour if one can get on that site. It's amazing to see what they're doing. But they're doing a development that is more mimicking what I experience in China than I do in the US.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes when we talk about the regional dynamics of commercial real estate and development, it's kind of a tale of two cities. It's Seattle and Bellevue. But within 15 minutes of both of those places, if you go south down to your place, it's, you know, you functionally have created a bit of a small city there, and it sounds like you're looking to double its size. And of course, it's not by accident. So as you're entertaining companies and inquiries and interest, what are some of the most profound pluses that the larger tenants that are coming through there are amazed at. I mean, I toured the facility 3 weeks ago, and I think if I was describing in one word, it's like just impressive. I mean, on every level, it's so thoughtful, it's beautiful. Everything is, state of the art, which played well for a lot of, COVID concerns that folks have. But what from your perspective, and what have you heard from the big companies coming through that they're most impressed about?
So it was interesting. We were asked to do 2 studies. One is largely to look at assembly, because it's companies that we know we need to have everyone working together. It's very flattering. The floor plates were like 35,000 foot floor plates, 24 elevators serving it, and those are low-rise buildings. So you can get around. But the thing that was surprising, we hired IA. So they did a lot of the planning for South Lake Union and et cetera. They did a big deep dive on meeting space and eateries. And there's 40% more eateries within a walk of Southport than there is in South Lake Union. That actually surprised David Coots and I, who oversaw that. So you need those amenities. And it gave me rise, because we had somebody who was looking for a large piece and they were going to use it for more office related use. I did a timeout on it. We're going to do food again there. So I want to make a destination within our site, but also the connectivity as we acquired the last 10 acres and how we connect to there's 600,000 feet of retail across the street.
Yeah.
And that's the shock to people. They come down there and you come off a freeway exit and it comes right to my site. It was built before Boeing went to Everett. So you have a 7-lane freeway exit that comes down, and I'm the first exit.
Yeah.
We're about to embark on the Park Avenue entrance. So we'll have another major entrance into the site, but it also allows for the next 1 million square feet to be built. But it was really the amenities, food, and entertainment. So you got the movie theaters, Top Golf's coming in there. We're on the water. So you've got, instead of a parking garage where you have a place for your bikes, we have a place for your kayaks. We have a place for your paddle boards, and make it fun. We're doing a speakeasy. We're doing a sports bar that'll have a 42-foot screen in it. And we're looking at doing a special gaming room that would, it has portals down into the sports bar. I mean, have some fun with this space, but make it, it's interesting. When people come and visit, they usually stay longer than they intend. Well, that's what I want. I want people to want to be there. And it was interesting because even Jassy, right before in his, there was a big talk that they gave at the end of the year, and Jassy described the future of his offices. You want to have, and they're talking about work from home versus, and he was all about collaboration, but something that really struck me as profound from his perspective was that people have to be able to choose to go to that office. So that's, I paid a lot of attention to that. So as we grew the dock space, what else can I do to make it, can I improve the connections to the park? What can we do for bike racks? What can we do for furnishing the outdoors? So I'm
cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I mean, we've certainly covered a lot of ground. I knew we were going to go over, and that's fine. People can drop off whenever they want. But while I have all you guys still on, and it looks like everyone is still on, did anyone have a question for somebody else on the panel as it applies? I just want to open up the roundtable to a free discussion since we've got the platform up and running, if there's interest in that.
Hey, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is for Bran or Owen. So they have done many transactions this year, and I think Owen had mentioned that it's many flexible office space requests. So it's like, what kind of businesses or what type of businesses? It's like, what was the change in the demand from the 2019 to 2020? It is like, I'm keen to understand what kind of people are what kind of businesses are making the decision of, we need to get these employees some level of face-to-face collaboration, or we need to have some access to the office spaces, or we need to have access to office space all the time. So what kind of business are making those decisions?
Yes,
Well,
to the tenant reps. Yep, go ahead.
sure. I mean, I think there's no single answer. I mean, it's a matter of, some might be looking more of like what Cody talked about, a hub and spoke model. Others, I had a client, for example, tell me that he had a contingency of folks on his team that just didn't have a good work from home environment, and they needed to have office space. In fact, he said, on a varying day, if the husband and wife had to be on a conference call, one had to take it from their restroom in their apartment because they didn't have the extra space. And so that was another need where they had employees saying, I need a place to work. It's just work from home doesn't work for me. And then we have others that are trying to use it as, for lack of better words, an insurance policy, right? You and WeWork and those like you provide people optionality and flexibility with their real estate. And whereas some landlords, not all, but depending on the amount of improvements you need, you might be looking at a 3 to 5 year commitment, in some cases even longer. And so therein lies the benefit of co-working or executive type space, where you can minimize your obligation, but solve for the immediate future.
I think the other answer to maybe your question is that I can't remember what study I was looking at, but that 80% of employees want to have direct access to their office, whether that be at the hub or that be at a peripheral office environment. For the reasons I Owen just said, they're having a very difficult time focusing and working from home for various reasons, space constraints, kid constraints, those kind of things. And, I think that lends itself to the hybrid model that we are hearing. Seems to be the common denominator between all of our discussions is this hybrid model. And that is that, people want access to their office, but they don't want it 5 days a week. There's the silver lining in this pandemic is that, I think it was a bit mundane going in 5 days a week, being there, being asked to be there. And maybe that's the benefit that we all get out of coming out of this difficult, challenging experience, is that won't be the way life is going forward. And then people will really adapt to this hybrid model. So you have access to your office, but you don't have to be there. And you can work from home on that Friday or that Monday or whatever day is convenient for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Michael. Michael, as you being in this industry for a long time, you have seen the ups and downs and in different countries too. So at this point, from a landlord's perspective, what are your challenges, like being a builder, being a landlord?
Well, it's interesting because I was careful to listen to your words earlier. The idea of co-working space now moving to flexible space. So building's 250. So rather than leaving 2 empty floors in that building, my first thought is I should do something for but what would be co-working? It would actually be a flex space for enterprise and build it out. And whether I do it or somebody else, because I don't necessarily want to be in all these businesses, I want to provide the expansion space necessary for that company. And the biggest problem they quietly mentioned after touring was every time they always underestimate their real estate needs, and they realize that the density is no longer, that template isn't going to be practical. So I think that's a roundabout answer to your question. I think finding the right, marrying the right companies like what you do and what WeWork does, et cetera, to that paradigm, but it's for enterprise. And I think that's a change, you know, because it was co-working before. And it's interesting even watching who's building the furniture, who's doing the dividers and all that. It's a fascinating business because it evolved very, very quickly with the unsurety. So it all ties to flexibility again. Keep growing it, you know, don't overpack those floors in the beginning, and then make provisions so you know what it would look like later.
Yeah, so are you talking about like within your building complex or maybe within your building to have dedicated flex workspace that the enterprises that are currently tenants in the building can flow in and out of easily?
Yeah, they're asking about where do I grow within those floors.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to build gaskets for them, and I can't just leave a space empty.
Right.
So how do we do something? And there's a relationship typically with the flex space provider and those same enterprise groups. They already have the relationships, they already have trust, they have the architects that do the space planning. And
yeah,
my job is really to create more money than would be historically available to the TI allowance. So I had to go back and build a bigger resource for that aspect of it, because it is more expensive when you're creating, you know, the spaces that like what WeWork does, et cetera, as your company does. I mean, so we created greater TI allowances for that provision.
Yeah, fascinating. Anyone else before we break for lunch? Well, personally, number one, I've enjoyed our conversation today, but even moreover, I've enjoyed the separate conversations that we've had throughout the week tremendously. This is a, you know, challenging time for the industry at large, but I think that there's very real support to not only a recovery, but a retooling and a reimagining of the industry as it applies, and where we're placed with such a high density of technology companies that simply will continue to grow. And Michael, I loved your point about it being a workers market versus a tenants market as it applies to real estate. So thank you all. Enjoy the beautiful weather today, as always, and we'll definitely catch up with you next time. Take care, everybody.